Now we have restarted recording. The recording will be sent out to all of our registrants. So if you know a colleague that was not able to make it this morning that registered, no worries. They will receive the recording as well. And of course, you can always share our webinars and resources. We also have all of our upcoming and previous webinars posted on our webpage, and they can also be found on our YouTube channel. Before we jump into all things financial aid, I wanted to share with you our professional learning series that just launched last month. The Texas OnCourse Professional Learning Series is a free digital learning opportunity designed for Texas middle and high school educators focusing on college and career planning. So on the second Tuesday of every month at 10 a.m., just like today, you can connect and learn from expert guest speakers on relevant counseling and advising topics. In addition to our monthly webinars, we are excited to introduce a new way to collaborate with your colleagues, and that is through our monthly coffee chats. These monthly coffee chats will occur on the last Tuesday of the month at 10 a.m. and will be an extension of our monthly webinars topic and an opportunity for you to continue that discussion with your colleagues. So mark your calendars and join us for coffee. Our next coffee chat is on September 26th at 10 a.m. There's no prep needed. Just bring your beverage of choice and come collaborate with your colleagues for 30 minutes in an informal breakout room setting. And then one more quick announcement before we dive into financial aid. Our next monthly webinar topic is focused on Tomorrow Ready Texas. We know there is no one-size-fits-all approach to family engagement. And as educators and administrators, you have a huge role in shaping the family-school partnership. Families are great at understanding their children's needs. And when schools work to ensure families have a voice in their child's educational experience, students definitely benefit greatly. So in this session next month, you will learn how Tomorrow Ready Texas can help elevate family engagement to improve student success. All right, so I'd like to take a brief moment to introduce our team. My name is Andrea Panter. I am the Senior Network Coordinator at Texas OnCourse, and I have the privilege of working with Laura Guggen, our Director of Professional Learning Engagement, Lauren Disher, our Professional Learning Coordinator, who is behind the scenes, dropping in links to all of our different resources. Thank you, Lauren. And Jared Garza, our Network Coordinator, whose first day was yesterday. So welcome, Jared. We will be your hosts throughout the Professional Learning Series, webinars, and coffee chats. And a big welcome to our speakers today. We really appreciate you being here with us this morning. And if you don't mind, just please take a brief moment to introduce yourselves. Jasmine, if you don't mind kicking us off.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine Tejeda. I recently got a promotion, so my title is now manager on the training and technical assistance team, but I'm from Aspire. Hi, everyone.
My name is Mireya Sandoval. I'm Senior Director of State Consulting. I'm here at Aspire. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Leah Smalley. I'm Senior Policy Director of Student Financial Aid Programs at the Coordinating Board, and I'm super excited to be here today. Thank you.
And my name is Ashley McKenzie. I am with the Texas OnCourse team, and I work on our content side as a subject matter expert. And so I'm excited to share some of our resources with you at the end of the webinar today.
Thank you all so much. And we're excited to learn from each of you today. So we do have some folks on the line, I noticed, who are new to us. So I'm just going to take a quick minute to introduce Texas OnCourse. With Texas OnCourse, all Texas students, no matter where they come from or where they're headed, have a plan for success after high school. All of the materials that we produce and all of the trainings that Texas OnCourse hosts, we always begin with this end in mind, that the work that we are doing is to help our students have a valuable plan after high school. The users of our tools include middle and high school counselors, teachers, administrators, and community-based organizations that all focus on post-secondary success. And of course, we also provide resources for our students and their families. So a little bit more about what we do. Texas OnCourse simplifies the college and career planning process with free digital tools. We provide online learning that is easily accessible. We have a library of courses and modules that you can complete at your leisure. Easy to digest information. The information that we provide is relevant and easy for you to understand, whether it's your first year in education or it's your 25th year, because we all know everything is continuously changing, right? That's why we're all here today. Educator training. We offer in-person and virtual professional development. We are flexible and adaptable, whether you're in need of an exploration of the academy or maybe in search of the latest updates on, for instance, today, TASFA, FAFSA. And then we also, there's access to extensive resources. We have, again, a library of resources accessible at your fingertips. These are all easy to search on our website, and they are also embedded within the different modules and courses. And as Ashley mentioned, she'll be sharing more of these resources towards the end of the session. All right, let's get down to business. Financial aid simplified. Is it really that simple? As we all know, financial aid has been a hot topic this year for high school educators and administrators. So this morning, we're just going to take some time to take an in-depth look at the simplified free application for federal student aid, FAFSA, and a detailed overview of the Texas application for state financial aid, TASFA. So we're going to cover the ins and outs of the new applications, exchange ideas on meeting graduation requirements, and provide you with toolkits, handouts, and resources to support your financial aid efforts. So real quickly, just an agenda, because who doesn't love an agenda? I have already covered our welcome and announcements, and the US Buyers team will kick us off with the latest and greatest FAFSA changes and updates. Leah will dive into the TASFA updates, and then Ashley will wrap us up by sharing with you those toolkits and resources that she and I both mentioned. And then we will also have some time at the end of this webinar for a Q&A session. Please continue to add your questions to the Q&A box. We really want to make sure they get into the Q&A box so that we make sure that they don't get lost in the chat. And we'll have plenty of time to answer those at the end of the webinar. So I am going to kick it over to Jasmine. If you want to go ahead and take control.
Yep, I'm just sharing my screen right now. So hopefully everyone can see my screen.
Yes,
Perfect. All right, let me just check the movement. Looking good?
looking great.
All right. Hi again. Welcome everyone. Good morning. My name is Jasmine Tejeda, as I mentioned earlier, and I am from US Buyer. I'm also joined by my colleague Mireya, who's on the line. We're going to be tackling those questions together at the end of today's training. So definitely hold your questions. I'm sure many of you all have a lot of good ones. But let's take a look at how we are going to spend the FAFSA portion of these updates. So we'll start off with some introductions for those of you who may not know who US Buyer is. Then we'll talk about some of the major changes that are coming to the FAFSA. We'll talk about some terminology shifts like contributors, what that means. And of course, we'll tackle the FSA ID creation process because there are some changes coming. We'll talk about how to transfer tax information this year into FAFSA forms because it is going to look a little different. And then, of course, we are going to talk about the student aid index replacing the expected family contribution. All right, so for those of you on the line who may not know who US Buyer is, we are a national nonprofit organization that works to ensure that all young people have the financial information and the resources necessary to find an affordable path to and through college. And the way that we do that is through our 4 impact models. We have our advising department, which works directly one-on-one with students, whether that be in person or through virtual advising. We have our training and technical assistance team that I am a proud member of. We train folks using the knowledge that we have gained over the years through our advising work. We have our policy department, which works to transform the systems that are currently in place that make it really difficult for students to navigate the financial aid process. And then we have our consulting team, which works to develop unique solutions to address partners' needs across the US. So I just want to take a minute and ask y'all a question. Can you let me know by using the chat? What is one word that you would use to describe your feelings about the upcoming changes to the FAFSA? Let me know in the chat. How are y'all feeling? All right, let me make this a little bit bigger. We got uneasy, overwhelmed, confused, unhappy, unsure, interested. These are coming in really fast. Rushed. I feel you on that. I feel you. Frustrated, unsure. Yep. I think I saw a why in there. I'm assuming you're like, why? Why are these changes coming? Concerned, frustrated. I hear you all. There are a lot of changes that are coming, and it has definitely taken me some time to get a little bit more comfortable with like even some of the terminology shifts, right? So hopefully y'all are gonna leave this session today feeling like you've gained a little bit more information and you're feeling a little bit better about the changes that are coming. Okay. So I know we only have a certain amount of time together, and I appreciate the fact that we were able to extend because there's a lot of good information today. But some of the major changes that are coming to the FAFSA, and we don't have enough time to dive into each one, so I want to take a minute and talk a little bit more about them. The first major change is that the 24-25 FAFSA will now open in December 2023. This is just for this year. Hopefully next year, right, the FAFSA will go back to opening on October 1st. Hopefully nothing changes, right? But for the 24-25 form, it is going to open at some point in December. And as of today, we have no idea what that day may be. It could be December 1st, or it could be, December 15th, right before we send everyone off for winter break. We don't know right now. There are also a lot of new terms that are going to be used this year for the FAFSA. So as I mentioned earlier, it's definitely taken me some time to get comfortable with using these new terms, but we'll talk a little bit more about the new terminology that we'll see on the new FAFSA. The EFC, or expected family contribution, is now going to will be replaced by the student aid index. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. This year, the form is going to be a role-based completion form, which means that any contributor, right, anyone who is required to provide information on a FAFSA, once they are in the form, they're only going to see questions that are related to their role. So for example, if you have a dependent student who needs to provide parent information, the student is going to enter their FAFSA, fill out the questions that are related to their role as a student, and then they're going to invite their parents to complete their section of the FAFSA, and their parents are only going to see questions related to their role as a parent. This year, FSA IDs are required for anyone who is a contributor on a FAFSA. So anyone who has to provide information on the form is going to be required to create an FSA ID. On top of that, contributors will have to provide consent for the IRS to share federal tax information on the FAFSA. So this includes folks who for sure file taxes, right? This includes folks who do not file taxes. So yes, they still need to provide consent. And this also includes folks who may be filing foreign tax forms. And then, of course, there is a new look and feel. Aesthetically speaking, there's some like color changes, right? It looks a little cleaner, a little nicer, but there are also fewer questions on the FAFSA that students and families are going to see. So let's talk about how folks are going to access the FAFSA form. I mentioned earlier the word contributor, and that is one of the new changes, one of the new terms that we're going to be using this year. A contributor is anyone who is required to provide information on the FAFSA. So this could be a student, right? We know the student who is applying for financial aid, they are definitely going to be a contributor on their own FAFSA. We have parents. If you are working with a dependent student and they are required to provide parent information, they are also going to be contributors on a FAFSA. If you're working with an independent student who is married, their spouse is also going to be a contributor on their FAFSA. And as I mentioned previously, contributors will need to be invited to complete their section of the form. So if a student logs into their FAFSA first, they're going to fill out their questions, right? The student section questions. And then once they are determined to be dependent, FAFSA is going to ask them to invite their parents to complete their own section of the form. The same will go for any independent student who is married. They will be asked to invite their spouse as a contributor to complete their own section of the FAFSA. Now we know FSA IDs, right? That's not a new term, but this year, what is new is that every contributor will need an FSA ID to access the FAFSA. And yes, if you're wondering, does this include parents who do not have a social security number? The answer is yes. Anyone, even if they do not have a social security number, any parent, right, without one, will now need to create an FSA ID account. Now, one of the top of mind questions for me, and I'm sure everyone at U Aspire, is how will parents without a social security number create their FSA ID? Well, as of today, FSA has not released the full details of what this process will look like. But we have heard that they will release more information at some point this fall. So our recommendation, based off of the information that we now know, our recommendation is to make sure that before the FAFSA opens, we have identified who is a contributor on a student's FAFSA so that we can make sure that every contributor has successfully created an FSA ID account before the FAFSA becomes available. I see a lot of questions coming in the chat, so I just want to remind y'all, drop those questions in the Q&A so we can keep track of them, right? And we don't lose them in the chat. I see some good ones coming in. All right, let's talk about financial information, because how financial information is going to be entered on the FAFSA is going to change. This year and years moving forward, the Direct Data Exchange, or the DDX, will replace the IRS data retrieval tool, previously known as the DRT, as the process for transferring tax information into the IRS. Now, what happens when a student, or a contributor, I should say, right? I'm trying, y'all, right? When a contributor grants consent for their federal tax information to be transferred over into the FAFSA, what happens is all those tax information questions that used to appear on the FAFSA, those questions are now going to be answered in the back end, right? Y'all remember the questions like, what was your adjusted gross income? Of that income, how much did you earn from working? Those questions are now being answered in the back end of the FAFSA form, which will result in a reduced amount of questions that families and students, or students and parents, or whoever's at home will see on the FAFSA form. So that's what I was talking about earlier, whereas there's a new look and feel. Yes, there are fewer questions that folks will see, but remember, those questions are still getting answered. It is just happening in a place where we cannot see. So, there we go. All contributors, to summarize, all contributors we know must consent to having their tax information transferred, even if they did not file a 2022 tax return, right? If you're working with a family that's like, oh, we didn't work in 2022, so we didn't file taxes, the reason that they need to provide consent is so that the IRS can say, hey, we have no tax information on file. And hopefully, right, in those instances, the hope, we don't know yet, but we're hoping that this will cut down on the verification process, right? Do y'all remember requesting those verification of non-filing letters? Hopefully, with the Direct Data Exchange, we won't need to do that because IRS is letting FAFSA know, hey, we have no income tax return on file for these folks. That's my hope, y'all, okay? We don't know for sure if that is what is gonna happen, but that's what we can guess, right? Now, there will be some few exceptions that will allow a manual tax information entry. One example is if you are working with someone who filed a foreign tax return, once they provide that consent, the IRS is going to say, we don't have anything on file for this person, right? And it's going to be because this student or sorry, not student, but it could be a parent, right? Or a student, I guess, who filed a foreign income tax return, and they're going to use that tax return to manually answer those tax questions. Now, what happens if consent is not granted? Well, if a student or parent or here I go again, any contributor, if any contributor does not provide consent, that student's FAFSA will be considered incomplete. And because their FAFSA will be incomplete, it means that they will be ineligible for federal financial aid. Now let's talk about reporting asset information. So in previous years, families were only required to report asset information if they made over $50,000, right? Remember those questions? How much do you have in cash, checking, savings, all that good stuff? This year, that threshold has increased. So now families with an adjusted gross income of more than $60,000 will be required to report asset information. Another change that we have coming to the FAFSA is that, again, in previous years, families with businesses or farms, they were not required to report the net worth of that business if they had fewer than 100 employees. However, moving forward with the 24-25 FAFSA, families will now be required to report the net worth of any business or farm of any size. So if you're working with a family, their adjusted gross income is over $60,000, they have a restaurant that maybe has, let's say, 5 employees. They are now required to report the net worth of that business on the FAFSA form. Now, one question that I have had for many months now after learning this is, how do we support families in calculating the net worth of their businesses or farms? I am not a small business owner. I have no idea where to even begin when it comes to calculate the net worth of someone else's business, right? So FSA has let us know that they're going to release some guidance, some more information on how to help families calculate that net worth. But remember, we are not business. Maybe some of us on the line are, right? But we do not have to step in as a business accountant for families to help to, lay out their receipts and everything and calculate the net worth. But it is definitely important for us to be able to provide resources and guidance to those families who are struggling to figure out what their business may be worth. So more to come on those resources. And last but not least, we have the Student Aid Index. So we know the Student Aid Index is going to replace the expected family contribution. This index is going to be used, just like the EFC, to determine eligibility for federal financial aid. Under the new SAI formula, a student could end up receiving a negative SAI. And in fact, the lowest SAI that a student could get is negative 1,500. One of the positive changes that are expected under the new SAI formula is that it will actually increase the number of eligible Pell Grant recipients. So let's take a look at a breakdown of the EFC formula in comparison to the SAI formula. So under the EFC formula, household size was reported by the student applicant. But under the SAI formula, family size, which is a new terminology shift, is automatically going to be calculated based on the number of dependents that were reported on the parent for a dependent student on the parent's tax return. Under the EFC formula, the number in college impacted the student's final EFC. So if you had parents who had 2 kids in college, remember that EFC used to get split in half to account for the burden of having multiple kids in college. Under the SAI formula, even though that the number in college question will come up, it is no longer going to be factored into the SAI formula. Now, colleges, they will still see the number in college question on FAFSA, and if they would like to, it is up to them. They could use that number in college when determining institutional aid. but that comes down to the individual school. Under the EFC formula, remember businesses and farms that had fewer than 100 employees were not counted as an asset. But under the SAI formula, businesses and farms of any size are now counted if you make more than $60,000. Under the EFC, the lowest that a student could get was 0. But under the SAI formula, the lowest in SAI that a student can get is negative 1,500. So let's talk about some of the potential impacts that this new SAI formula could have on students. The State Higher Education's Executive Officers Association, such a mouthful, used the new SAI formula and some available data that they had from previous FAFSA years to conduct an analysis on the potential impacts that this may have on students. So here's what they found. 8% of students will likely have a higher SAI than EFC. This is making me think about the students who are going to be renewing their FAFSA form, right? They're going to see some shifts because they're going to maybe have to provide information that they previously didn't have to. So when I see that 8%, I'm thinking of those renewing FAFSA students. 13% of students will likely see no change from their EFC to their SAI. And 78% of students are likely to have a lower SAI than they would have under the EFC formula. So let's take a look at what's coming next, right? What are these next couple months going to look like? So at some point, I think this was all the days are kind of mushing together for me. So at some point this summer, FSA did release the FAFSA preview presentation deck. If you have not gotten a chance to take a look at that deck, I strongly encourage you to build out some time in your schedule to take a look at those screenshots. Now, I'll be honest, it's a very generic walkthrough. We got like a dependent student in a 2-parent household, and they are both willing to provide consent on a FAFSA. So it's a pretty easy kind of form, right? It doesn't get into those tricky scenarios, but it will give you an idea of what the questions will look like, how they're going to come up, in what order. So again, if you haven't seen that deck already, I will definitely make sure that it gets to you somehow so you can take a look at it. FSA is going to release a new draft. I think they were supposed to release it last week, but it's been delayed. So it could come this week or maybe next week. Once that new draft becomes available, FSA is also going to have a feedback period. So if you have feelings about some of the things that are coming on the form, definitely use that feedback period to let them know how you feel. I know there are a couple questions that are now going to be removed from the FAFSA that were on the original FAFSA preview presentation. For example, there was a question that asked students if they are transgender, and a lot of folks were concerned about what colleges were going to do with this information. So now that question is going to be removed. So FSA is definitely listening to y'all. So again, I encourage y'all to give feedback if you can. At some point in the fall, the FSA ID process for folks without a social security number will be released. Again, some point this fall, the Federal Student Aid Estimator tool will be launched. I highly encourage, if you are working with students who are going to be renewing their FAFSA, so they are already in college, I think this tool is going to be essential for them and their families to get an idea of some of the changes that are going to happen in terms of their eligibility. At some point in December, we don't know the date yet, but we know it will definitely be before the FAFSA opens. The FAFSA demo site will be available. And then, of course, the FAFSA will officially open at some point this December. So just to go over some of the things that we can do in the meantime, I know I'm cutting into some time, but as we're waiting for FAFSA to open, let's plan some financial aid information nights for folks. Let's help students and parents create their FSA IDs when we learn more about what that process will look like. Make sure that students, especially students who are renewing their FAFSA, let's make sure that they are using that Federal Student Aid Estimator tool when it becomes available. We should be focusing on outside scholarships year round, honestly, but especially in the fall as we're waiting for FAFSA to open. And then also, let's use this time to start other financial aid applications like the CSS profile, which College Board has announced is still going to open up on October 1st. All right, y'all, I'm almost at the end of today's session, but I just wanted to plug some future sessions that You Aspire is having. We have 3 more preparing for FAFSA simplification webinars. They are free and they are open to anyone and everyone. The next one is tomorrow at 11 a.m. We have another one on October 17th, and then we have another one on November 29th. We are going to update these decks as more information comes out. So I always tell people, maybe you want to go to the November 29th one because it's going to have the most up-to-date information. So hope to see y'all there. Thank you for having me today. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and pass the mic.
Thank you, Jasmine. All right, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. So before I hand over the reins to Leah, please let us know how much experience you have with the TASFA and how comfortable you are with the TASFA. So do you feel like you're a beginner? Maybe this is your first year, maybe second or third, average, and you can put these in the chat. You have several years under your belt, but still learning as things are, continuously changing, or maybe as you're coming across different maybe unique situations with your students, or you feel pretty experienced. You've got a lot of years under your belt, but always trying to stay up to date. So while y'all are answering this, I will allow Leah to now take over. Thank you so much, Jasmine, for sharing all that with us. And remember, please put those questions in the Q&A so that we can make sure that we're answering all of those for you at the end of this session.
All right. I need a shout out. Can you see my screen? Is it the correct screen?
Yeah, we can see it,
Yes.
Leah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Again, my name's Leah Smalley. I am Senior Policy Director at the Coordinating Board. I recently changed roles into this Policy Director role, but prior to this, I have overseen the TASFA creation and publication for the last 7 years at the Coordinating Board. I continue to work on the TASFA and just in a different capacity, but myself and hopefully several people on this call that are watching, if they're there, we were all involved in the building of the online TASFA. So huge shout out to them, because you may or may not know this, but the online TASFA actually did launch last month. And so it was a huge celebration at the Coordinating Board, even though a lot of high school counselors and people in the community don't technically know. We did a soft launch. So yay. So today I'm actually going to go through everything with y'all, more of a high level overview, just to give you a sneak peek on, what does the online form look like, hopefully answer some of your questions, but I am trying to keep this a little bit more generic so that way we can get through more information versus going into the real nitty gritty. But I do think it'll be very valuable regardless of your experience level. If you're a beginner, you'll kind of get to know it a little bit better. If you're experienced, you'll get to see what the online form looks like. So without further ado, let me get started here. So first and foremost, TASFA, Texas Application for State Financial Aid, is what the document is called. I don't know why once upon a time they decided to name it that so closely to the FAFSA, but I guess it helps because it's very similar. But let's see if I can get this to work. My presentation's not nearly as awesome as Jasmine's, but I'm going to try my best here to make this entertaining. But we're really going to be focusing a lot on the 23-24 TASFA. Now, most of you on the call are probably thinking, that doesn't apply to us, right? Like most of the students or the families that you're helping will be focusing on 24-25. But the reason I'm going to focus on 23-24 is because it is our foundation for the upcoming 24-25 release. And so it's, going to mirror all of the same information. Now, a lot of the changes that Jasmine went over, we are doing a lot of analysis to figure out how is that going to affect the TASFA. If you're new to the TASFA, one clarification is, and I'll just tell you my original experience with this. When I first started at the coordinating board, I was like, oh, cool. They have like this state application that they can apply for financial aid. Well, come to find out that that's not quite the case. The TASFA is intended for those that cannot complete the FAFSA. So if you have a student, a lot of the students that fill that out tend to be affidavit students, or what people refer to as undocumented students, but it's not the only thing it can be used for. A lot of colleges and universities use it for different things, but that is the primary purpose, is for state financial aid for students that cannot complete a FAFSA. So that's the best way to think about it. So today I'm going to be going through what we're calling application highlights for 23-24. I'm going to show y'all the brand new TASFA landing page, our decision tree that we've built, and then the application process online. And then I'll briefly be touching on 24-25. And the reason for that is because we're actually still building the paper form. And then, of course, the online application, it will be released this year. And by this year, I mean this school year. So I can't guarantee when that'll happen, because one of the main drivers of us releasing the online form is that FAFSA. So we have to make sure that we have certain alignments with the federal form, so that way we can allow colleges to do their SAI calculation. And in order to do that, we kind of have to wait to see what the Department of Education is going to do. So let's get started. All right. So what does the user experience look like for the online TASFA? Again, this is 23-24, but one thing to keep in mind is there's still students that are completing 23-24, which just started this August. This application goes from now until next year, so we do still have a lot of students completing this application. We don't have as many high school students completing this application. High school seniors that are going to be going to college next fall will need to do 24-25. So definitely keep that in mind when people come and start asking, like, which one should I do? Make sure you look up which application applies to that scenario. All right, so on the page, we have built on the coordinating board's website a TASFA landing page. And on here, we've got different information available to students so that they can decipher on, do they actually complete the TASFA, or what if they need to do the FAFSA. So one of the things we decided to build was something called a decision tree. As you scroll down on the landing page, you'll notice there's two boxes there. You have a Get Started button, where if somebody's like, yep, I know what I'm doing, I need to get started, they can go directly to the account creation process. But we also have on the right-hand side a little Learn More button that says, I'm not really sure if I'm supposed to do the TASFA or the FAFSA, so they can go through that decision process a little bit more easily. And so when they get to that screen and they click Learn More, only 4 questions pops up. So that's helpful. They don't have to answer a ton of information. But on here, this really drives them to either the FAFSA, or it keeps them going into the next question. So you'll notice on the screen, which I realize is very small, it asks one question about their citizenship. And then if they answer yes, it has a button to take them to the FAFSA. You'll notice on the right-hand side, there is kind of like a little bypass where they can still go to the TASFA, but we put not recommended based on their FAFSA. And then if they answer no. So on here, again, you can see it, I clicked no, and so there's a continue button, and then I'm going to fast forward to the 4th question, because that's really what gets you to starting the TASFA. So this is their residency questions. It kind of helps gauge, are they a Texas resident? And if they are, then they start their TASFA. Now, if they hit no, they're not a Texas resident, we basically tell them, based on your responses, it doesn't seem like you should do a FAFSA or a TASFA, so talk to your college. They may even reach out to the counselor, high school counselor, to say, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? And at that point, you would have to decide, do you want them to continue on with the TASFA process or not? So for demo purposes, if they hit start a TASFA, it's going to take them to the user account creation process. And on here, they would just simply click on sign up now. And what they'll need to do in order to create an account is they actually have to supply a valid email address, and then they send themselves a verification code. Once they get the verification code and all of that is verified, then it will give them this really simplified short registration form. They just fill out their name, password, and whatnot. And then after it's created, then they actually have to log.
Leah, I think we lost your screen.
Back. I saw that. How far did y'all get? Can you see my screen, or do I need
No,
to
we just lost it. Can you try sharing again?
Sure. Let me see here. Okay. What do y'all see? I don't know.
Mission, vision, philosophy.
That's the wrong screen. That's a good one too, though, but that's not, that's not what we're doing. There we go. Okay. I'm not a Zoomer, people. I'm a Teamser.
You're doing great. TASFA account registration is what we see now.
Awesome. Okay. So the front end process to create an account is a little cumbersome, but the reason we're doing it is for security purposes. Just like any new technology, there's lots of verify with this code and validations and whatnot. So once they fill out this form, go back over here, then if they're new or returning, they basically end up on the login screen. They'll enter their email and address, and then they hit sign in, which then again validates with that code. So that's again the first steps in getting into the TASFA. Now, once a returning user or a new user goes in for the first time, they're going to see this apply now page. And this is kind of the starting place for the TASFA. This is saying, okay, you've created your account. Now you're ready to get started. So they do click the apply now button, and then it takes them to the applications page. Now, once we roll out the 24-25 TASFA, you'll see both of them on the screen. So you'll actually have students that will have to choose which one they're applying for. And again, that's because we always have overlapping application cycles every single year. The good news is we plan to put 24-25 at the top, and then we'll move 23-24 down because we know most applicants are going to be using the newer form at this point. Now, the first thing is a lot of people have been asking, well, what about Spanish? Is there going to be a Spanish form? And the good news is, yes, there will be in the future. Right now, it's because of the amount of development and keeping up with the FAFSA, we have to prioritize the amount of things that we can accomplish. And so for this 23-24 as well as 24-25, you'll see here that we have some Spanish content, but it's linked to the paper form. And the reason we put that on there is we wanted people to have access to the Spanish since we don't have it published in Spanish yet for the online version. So the user can either pull it up and use it as a tool to guide them through the English version online. They can choose to stop right there and print it and fill it out in the Spanish like they always have. They can kind of use it how they see fit, but really at this point, just know that it is in the future plans for the TASFA, but right now this is our workaround so that people at least have it as a resource. Now, when the user first logs in, like I said, they're going to have a option to have both, but for right now we have 23-24, and there's a start button. Now, this page is dynamic in the sense that each time when they log in, if they've already gotten to a certain point, the button changes. So it starts off as a start button, and then once they've established a TASFA and they come back and they log in, it changes to resume. And then after they've submitted the form, it actually looks like this, where it has multiple buttons. So I'll be going through this in just a moment, but that's just kind of to show y'all that, you know, the screen kind of changes as they go through the process, so that they know that their information was saved. And then, of course, once it's submitted, they can access their TASFA in other ways. All right. So once they progress past the application page and they hit start, it's going to take them to an instructions tab. And this is really more to be more technical help. Like, here's what the buttons do, here's what the pages, here's the information you're going to need to enter. So it's just kind of more instructional. It's not walking them through the individual questions. Okay. Now, you'll also notice on this left-hand banner that there's a little menu, and the student can actually hop around from tab to tab. They don't have to go in order. They can go and fill out the information they need, but some of them appear and disappear depending on responses. So just keep that in mind. All right, so once they click on this prior button, they click the next button, it's going to take them to the student tab. The student tab has 3 sections currently, and again, this could change for 24-25 depending on how we decide to do that alignment with FAFSA. But right now we have their personal information, which is, you know, all their demographics. Then we have their income and asset questions, and then we have federal benefits and household information. And we've actually created this little page section at the top. This allows them to easily hop down throughout so they don't have to scroll. This page is quite lengthy, so it kind of breaks it up for them if they want to be able to navigate more easily. On the student section, one of the primary things that we built as a tool for data to integrate into the Apply Texas Counselor Suite was the collection of the high school information. So, you know, on the FAFSA, when the student fills it out, they put in their high school, and then that information makes it over to the Counselor Suite. If it can find, you know, a solid match, you'll be able to confirm that they did their FAFSA through that Counselor Suite. Well, TASFA, since it's not through the Department of Education, we have collected the high school information on the TASFA, and then we're routing those students over to the Counselor Suite as well. So starting with 24-25, once we get the online TASFA out, you will start seeing students who've completed a TASFA in the Counselor Suite. Now, if the student, they do have to use the table that's on the screen here. We do pull that from Texas Education Agency, so those should align, but because we know high schools change names so frequently, it is impossible to keep it 100% up to date. So in the event the student can't find their high school in the list, we do have this little option where they can type it in manually. And then if the student moved here from out of state and they can't obviously choose from the list, they can also select no and type in theirs manually as well. The other thing that we have is selective service. Again, if you're new to financial aid and you're like, wait a minute, what? Like, this doesn't make sense to me. Financial aid, the federal form doesn't have selective service anymore. Why does the state form have it? Well, state financial aid still requires that students who are born male must be registered or exempt from selective service. So years ago, we added in the selective service registration statement into the form to help the colleges out. We didn't want them to have to collect an additional document. And so this was built into the TASFA, I think 3 or 4 years ago. So similarly, on the online form, we wanted to make sure that we have that. So the student does indicate if they are male or female. Again, this is based on what they're assigned at birth. There's no other gender questions, and we're not building any new gender questions. The only purpose of this question is to determine if they have to designate their selective service status. If they have an exemption box on here that they can type in their reason that they're exempt, or they can put if they're registered. It has all the options there. But this information is collected and then routed over to the college. All right, so dependency status. Once they finish the student section, they move on to the dependency status. Again, they technically can hop around, but I'm just going in order so that you can kind of see the flow here. On the very top of the form, 41 and 42 are actually pulled in automatically for the student from the student page. If they didn't fill it in, it will be blank. So they do have to go back and fill it in on the student section, but it's going to pull in their response based on their date of birth and their marital status automatically. The remainder of the questions they answer, and as you may be aware, this is the dependency questionnaire. So depending on how they answer, will populate a parent tab, or the parent tab will disappear. So it's going to have it, if they're dependent, then the parent information will be required. If they are independent, then it would not be displayed at all. All right, once they get to the parent tab, we have skip logic built in based on how they answer if their parent is married or not. If their parent says that they are not married, then the second parent's information boxes disappear. One thing that is kind of critical on the TASFA is the parent's email address must be different than the student's. And another shout out, since a lot of y'all are counselors at high schools, please make sure that when the student signs up for their account that they're not using a high school or something that could change for their email address. Because they won't be able to change that in the future. You know, these accounts get set and then they're very difficult to change because of security reasons. So we did put that on there, but since I have y'all on here, it'd be nice to point out that they really should be using like a Gmail or some other kind of account outside of either the college or the high school. It should not be one of those accounts. Parent email also must be different, otherwise they will not be able to complete their acknowledgement on the TASFA. Once they complete the parent section, they go over to the college section where it's actually a table just like the high school table. It's a whole listing of colleges that they can choose from. The student can choose up to 10 at a time. And what happens is as they click on the table, which I don't have on the screen right now, but as they do that, it moves it over to the selected tab, and that's what you see on your screen. It collects the university's name, their school code, and then their housing status. And then the student can choose to, let's see if I can get this. If the student needs to remove them at that point, they can remove and go back to the table. And so that's kind of a nice little tool there where they can go in and do those selections. Again, they can do 10 at a time. So once they actually submit their TASFA, they can go back to the screen and add up to 10 more. They can log back in and do 2 more. They can do 5 more. So they can do as many as they need over and over again until they've submitted to all of the colleges that they choose. We don't recommend that they just submit to any and every college, just because that, just like anything else, creates an administrative burden if they're not planning to go to college there. But if they are applying to a bunch of different colleges to see what financial aid options there are, they can go above 10. They just can only do up to 10 at a time. All right. Once they get to the submit section, you'll notice at the top of the screen that there's a little a little pink banner. The pink banner indicates if something's missing in the application. So it's hyperlinked to the form. They can go back and correct it. All of the questions will have red font underneath to tell them what they missed and how to correct that. Once they get that done, once they clear it and they're a dependent student, and they get to this page, this is actually what it looks like. It says, great job, your task was almost done. We need you to have your parent log in and acknowledge the information that was entered. So on here, we have little instructions that they can use, which is the majority of the content on the page. But right here is where the parent's email, they'll need to confirm that that's the correct one. And if it is, then they'll hit send email. If it is not the correct email for some reason, maybe there was a mistake, they can go back to the parent section and correct that. The link is only good for 24 hours. If it expires, the student can log in and resend the email to the parent. They can do that as many times as they need to, but the link that the parent's going to get is just 24 hours for security purposes. Once they send the email, this is what it changes to. So it says the email was sent successfully and that they're awaiting the parent's acknowledgement. So what that looks like is the parent will get an email, and within that it has instructions, And then it has a kind of a button that they're going to click on. And when they click on that, it's going to ask for 3 specific student validation items. And the reason for this is, again, because a lot of these students don't have social security numbers or other, specific information. We had to have a way to make sure that the parent or anyone who gets a hold of this email is the right person. So they have to have these like key items in order to access the TASFA. And so the 3 items are the student's email that they entered on the TASFA. There is a student application ID, which is actually on the one page we already looked at. I think it's like 25 characters. So I will not even pretend that it's something short and easy, but the reason it's so long is, again, creating an extra layer of security there. So the student's application ID is something that the student has to provide to the parent, and the student can get that through their account. The students also emailed their student ID when they first begin the TASFA. Lastly, the student's date of birth has to match identically for all 3 items, or else they cannot access the TASFA. Now, once they actually get in and they log in, the entire application is read-only, meaning the parent cannot make changes to the TASFA. Only the student can log in. So if the parent logs in and like, hey, well, you got my income totally wrong, the student would log in to make those changes before the parent does their acknowledgement. So there is still flexibility on that, but the parent does not have access from the button in the email. Once they've reviewed the application, then the parent actually goes to the submit section, and they are going to read the acknowledgement statement. They will check the little box at the top here. And then I believe the button actually says submit acknowledgement, because they're not submitting the application. They're submitting the acknowledgement that their data is actually right. So little minor differences on how it looks now. We did some last minute updates. Now, once the parent does that, they'll actually get a pop-up, and from here, they cannot access the TASFA at this point. That means that they are done. The only way that they can see anything is if the student logs in, but the only purpose for the parent logging in is to do that acknowledgement. So again, you've heard me say this like 100 times. For security purposes, they are essentially locked out after they're done. Once the parent has done that and the student logs in and they go to the submit page, this is what they will see. It says your parent's done. Now it's your turn. The student then goes in here. They double check that the colleges at the bottom of the screen, there's a little table. They can view and make sure that it has all the colleges that they want. At this point, they can add additional ones if they need to. But if it's good to go, then they click on their acknowledgement box and then they hit submit. After this, they get the same pop-up that the parent did. It's a little confirmation saying, you successfully submitted your TASFA. And then from here, if you go back over to the menu that we looked at the very, very beginning, if you recall, we had the different options. This is the 3rd option we looked at, which is they've already submitted. So from here, they can view their online application, and it's a read only. Once they submit it, they cannot correct the TASFA in their account. They have to go directly to the college or university, and they'll likely have to provide documentation if something's changed. But maybe in the future we'll have a corrections process. But again, this is the very beginning of our journey on TASFA. So we definitely tried to make it as user-friendly as possible, but corrections are very complicated. So once they have submitted, it is locked. Now, you'll notice up here at the top, though, there is a little hyperlink. If they click on that, it launches the paper TASFA, and it's all filled in for them. So they can save a copy for their records. They can print it out and bring you a copy. They can do whatever they need to do, and it's per college. So each college that they submitted to, they can pull up a different one and print it if they choose to. And then lastly, you have this submit to additional colleges. Like I mentioned, they can do up to 10 at a time. They would need to use the submit additional colleges button. The view online application, again, is read only. It doesn't really allow them to do the additional colleges. They have to kind of go through the correct path there. All right, so let's look at some of the features real quick. So we did build this to be dynamic, meaning that, you know, most people these days use a cell phone or some kind of other device other than a computer. So we wanted to make sure that it was user friendly. So you'll notice this is more of a cell phone look and feel. So there are different devices that the student can use and it should still work. The navigation buttons at the top, any of these except for the page section, but if they hit the next button, they hit the previous button, or the save button, all three of those actually save the application. That way they don't lose anything. So that's very helpful because a lot of people don't actively think to do that. So the only thing that it does not do is if the student is timed out and they have not navigated anywhere else, it does not save it on timeout. So they do need to actively be saving it, but if they just jump from screen to screen, it does autosave. The Spanish TASFA, remember in the beginning, I told you we had those copies, but if you're like me and you're like brand new to something and you're like, wait a minute, where did that Spanish copy go? I don't know where it went. We decided to go ahead and put it up here at the top. That way, if somebody needs that resource or if they change their mind and they want to do the Spanish copy, it launches that same content that we showed you at the beginning, and then they can click on the hyperlink and it'll launch the paper version in Spanish. Masking is included for certain items such as date of birth. If they have a DACA or a social security number, all of those are masked, so for privacy purposes. And then lastly, we have help icons. If you recall in the beginning, I told you instructions don't necessarily have instructions. They're like technical instructions. Help icons are almost on every single question, and they guide the user similar to the FAFSA, tell them like, hey, you need to enter this information, or here's the criteria you need to consider. And those are like pretty much throughout every single section. So that was the online form. Again, that's the foundation we're using for 24-25. So you kind of have a sense of what to expect. It will look different. We've already started making changes to the form, but they will be minimal. And the overall, the user experience and how you do things, the concept I just showed you, that's what it's going to be like for 24-25. Now, this is really short, but I think one of the probably the biggest questions, I haven't looked in the QA, is, well, what about the priority deadline, right? What's going to happen to January 15th? So I wanted to make sure to let y'all know that we did update the priority deadline from January 15th to March 15th of 2024. That is just for this award year. Unless something major happens for next year, our rules for the state allow the Commissioner of Higher Education to extend or move that date. So this year, because of FAFSA and their process, he did make the decision to move that out to March 15th so that students have a little bit more time to submit. And that is for both the FAFSA and the TASFA on how institutions prioritize applications. As a reminder, the priority deadline is not a deadline. It's not a cutoff. All it is it helps colleges decide how to allocate their funds to students. So they do have different ways to determine who's going to get those funds since it's limited. But once March 15th passes, that does not mean a student is not going to get any money or that they didn't meet the deadline. It just means that after that date, the funds are much more sparse. The couple things here. So we are still doing the paper TASFA. It's not going away. We are trying to get that out when the FAFSA goes live. So once the FAFSA is done, we will be publishing the paper form. The online TASFA will take longer because, like I said, we have to determine what they're changing and make those revisions to our code. And so that's going to be a little bit longer. I do not have a date. I think I saw something pop up asking. I don't have an exact date on when that will be because it's contingent on testing and making sure that it's ready to go, but we will have the paper form like we have in the past. That will align with FAFSA. I think that's it. I know I'm over on time because I tend to talk a lot. So I appreciate all y'all's time. And I will ask Andrea, do you want me to field questions really quick or we'll circle back at the end?
We're going to circle back. We've just got a quick wrap up
Yep.
with our resources, and then we will open up the Q&A.
Awesome.
And you all should now be able to see my screen. Can I get a, okay, awesome, perfect, thank you. Thank you so much, Leah. That was a lot of great information. Again, as I mentioned, please continue to put those questions in the Q&A box. We are gonna have, in just a couple minutes, we're gonna have plenty of time to answer those questions. But before we transition into our resource spotlight, just again, if you guys can let us know how much experience you have with Texas OnCourse resources. Do you feel like you're a beginner? You're just learning about all the different resources that Texas OnCourse has to offer. Maybe you feel average, you utilize a lot of the Texas OnCourse resources already in your classrooms or on your campus and are always just excited to learn more. Or maybe you've been using Texas OnCourse as one of your go-to resources for years. So again, just want to kind of gauge where you guys are at. It was really interesting to see where everybody was at with the TASFA. We had quite a bit of people across the board, a lot of beginners, and then average, kind of middle, and then we had quite a few experienced as well. So it's good for us to be able to gauge our audience, so we're able to provide y'all with the most up-to-date information. All right, so I'm gonna shift it over to Ashley for the Texas OnCourse Resource Spotlight.
Awesome, thank you. So our first resource that we are going to highlight for you is our financial aid requirement websites and toolkits. And so we have had these websites and toolkits available for you since the new financial aid graduation requirement went into effect a couple years ago. And we are actively updating those for the FAFSA simplification and for online TASFA release. So as we get more information, we make changes to that. There are 4 toolkits available for you. One is geared toward counselors and advisors, one toolkit for community partners, one for families, and another for students. In all of these toolkits, we've worked really hard to provide you with a lot of easy, downloadable, printable resources that you can just plug and play into your financial aid nights and distribute to students and parents. We have also worked hard to also provide you with either Spanish translations of all of our Texas OnCourse documents that we've created, and then for any outside source that we are referring you out to, we've provided options to find that same information in both English and Spanish to help you out also. And then for the family toolkit and the student toolkit, both of those have also been translated into Spanish. So if you need to download and share that with your students, you can. Like I said, each one comes with a huge resource library and links to tons of great information for you. Our next resource that we have available for you is through our Texas OnCourse Academy. And so that is, hopefully you guys are familiar with that and you've used it. This is our online professional development Canvas program for you. We have basic principles of financial aid covered, as well as FAFSA and TASFA modules. So you can go in, and if you are new to counseling and this is your first year and you need to become familiar with it, it's a great place to start. Or if you're just looking to refresh, all of the information that is covered in our programs today, you can find summaries of that in our FAFSA modules. And like I said, as we get more information about FAFSA simplification, we are working hard to keep that updated with new information as it's released. Next, we have a great resource for students. If you are not familiar with Ask Advi, it is our virtual advisor for Texas students. When your students create a profile in their Apply Texas application, they are able to opt in to this great text messaging service that will send them regular campaigns with reminders to complete important stages of their admission application process, financial aid applications.
It is a trained bot, so so students can respond and ask questions. And anytime a student has a question that our bot is not able to answer, those text messages are sent directly to one of our real life ADVI advisors, and they can respond and engage with the students to provide additional support. We also have ADVI advisors that are bilingual. So if a student requests additional help in Spanish, we can support that also. So Ask ADVI is a really awesome service to help you out because students may be working on their applications when you aren't available to answer their questions. So I encourage you, whenever they are filling out that Apply Texas application and they see that question, I think it's on the next slide, that asks them, do you consent and agree that Apply Texas and its partners may communicate with you? That is how they opt in to ADVI. So make sure that they check yes to that, and then they'll start getting those messages from our Ask ADVI bot. And then finally, our last resource that I want to bring to your attention is specifically for families and parents. Tomorrow Ready Texas launched last year, and this is a great website that takes all of our knowledge and resources from the Texas On-Course Academy that you're familiar with, and it translates it into a language and a service that is easy for parents and families to use. So families can create an account. They can choose what grade level their student is in, and we start with 8th grade and go all the way through 12th grade. And then they can select if they want to include on their action plan information about college planning, financial wellness, jobs and careers, life skills, and military readiness. And it has a ton of great information about transition planning and transition services for students with disabilities, because we know that that can be a real challenge for parents, as well as a lot of really good and helpful information about completing FAFSA and TASFA. So those are our resources. Like I said, we're updating them regularly. We know that FAFSA is going to change some more. And once we get some more concrete information from FSA, we'll continue to just make updates and make sure that all of that aligns with the newest version of those forms.
Thank you, Ashley. And as I mentioned earlier, for those of you that Tomorrow Ready Texas is new to you, we will be our next monthly webinar in October 10th. We will be highlighting and going into more detail about Tomorrow Ready Texas. So definitely join us in for more about Tomorrow Ready Texas. So we are going to shift into our questions, our Q&A sessions. So I'm going to go ahead and start with our FAFSA questions. We're going to try and get through. We have about 15 minutes left. We're going to try and get through as many of these as possible. So our first one is, how early should we create the FSA ID? And then I'm going to go ahead and combine that with, will they need to be invited first before they can make an FSA ID?
So for parents who have social security numbers, they can create their FSA ID right now. For parents who do not have social security numbers, we have to wait until we get that guidance from FSA, what that process will look like. And I think the second question was, will they need to be invited before they can make an FSA ID? The answer is no, but my recommendation is that you should have FSA IDs created before you invite parents, so that matching process is quicker. And because FSA will release more guidance on the FSA ID creation process this fall, we should have that on-ramp to be creating FSA IDs before December comes. So again, the answer is no, but my recommendation is to have those FSA IDs created before you get to the invite page.
And do they need to fill out the forms at the same time to avoid any mistakes and make sure the information is correct and the same?
No, they don't need to be filling it out at the same time, but I think this is more of a question of, how do we, as folks who are supporting students and families in schools, right, in those like 30-minute, 1-hour blocks, like what is going to be most helpful? And to be honest, we don't know yet, right? We can only talk about what this process will look like in theory, and we just have to rely on, you know, you guys and other folks who are on the other folks who are going to be actually in this forum with parents and students to figure out what is going to work best for the families and the communities you support, but they do not have to complete it at the same time. But again, that might be helpful for your communities.
And what information will the students need to invite, like their parents or a contributor?
Yeah, so they will, so there will be a parent, I think they're called parent wizard questions. You'll go through them, you'll identify who the parent is on the FAFSA, and then the student will be asked to put in their full name, their full name, their date of birth. If they have a social security number, they'll need to enter that number, but there will also be a little box that says, my parents don't have a social security number. You can check that off. And then you'll need to provide an email address. The email address does not need to be the email address that was used to create the parent FSA ID account. The student could decide to send it to their best friend's email account if they wanted to. But that's the information they'll need.
Thank you. And so since this is a graduation requirement, is there still the opt form that we need to do, and where do we get it? Is it still the TEA website?
I'm not sure if that's a question for Leah, but go ahead.
No, yeah, I was gonna probably pitch it over to Leah. I know the opt-out form is still available on the TEA website, but I know probably confirmation from the team.
Yeah, I mean, TEA is a separate entity, but as far as I know, nothing's changed. So if they do, they'll update the form on their website, but you can continue to use the same form. Nothing has changed on the graduation requirement. The student either has to complete a FAFSA or TASFA or complete that kind of opt-out process. So until they provide a newer form, you can continue to use the current one available.
Okay, some of these got answered already. Where do we go to the deck for the questions? I'm not too sure what that one's.
Maybe they're asking.
I think they might be asking for the FAFSA preview deck from FSA. So I know FSA did release the preview deck based on like the timeline Jasmine shared. So we could probably either share it with the Texas On-Course team to go ahead and share it out as a follow-up.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then what happens if the contributor did not file taxes?
If a contributor did not file taxes, they're still required to provide consent, because what will happen is the IRS will be able to communicate with FAFSA that they have no income tax return on file. And so they'll see that, they can move through the rest of the application, and they won't be no one will be asked any additional tax information questions, but yes, they will still be required to provide consent.
Okay, and then this one's for FAFSA too. What if parents both work and make more than 60,000 and do not have assets?
If both parents work and they make over 60,000, 0. If there are no assets to report, then you just enter 0 in the asset question section.
And then what kind of financial aid info sessions would you be offering, since we don't know enough yet? That's a great question.
I know that we are partnering with TexCan, and we have a bunch of FAFSA trainings that are coming up this fall, which we have a meeting in 20 minutes or so. So there are some trainings that we are trying to get out to y'all this fall.
Yes, definitely. And do both parents automatically need an FSA ID if one parent does not have a social security number?
Do both parents need an FSA ID if one parent doesn't have a social security number?
Yes. Yeah.
Parent. Okay, so I don't know if this is gonna exactly answer your question, but so first and foremost, having a social security number, it doesn't matter. Every single parent that is a contributor is required to have an FSA ID account, regardless of if you have a social security number or not. However, if you are working with a dependent student and they are required to report their parents' information, let's say they're married and they filed their taxes jointly, the student only needs to invite one parent, right? Like, let's say it's mom who's the one who handles business, right? The student can go ahead and invite mom, and mom can go into the FAFSA, start entering in their parent information, and they can provide the second parent's info, but the student only needs to go in and invite that one parent. Hopefully that answered your question.
Great. And then next one is, so it is required to give consent to IRS, not optional this year.
Correct. If you would like your student to remain eligible for federal financial aid, consent is required.
And then we had one, is Texas priority deadline for FAFSA TASFA going to be changed? We answered that one. Where can we get assistance for students with different family situations?
If this is in relation to FAFSA, come to our trainings. Hopefully, once we get those registration links out with TechScan, definitely come to those trainings, because that is where we're going to tackle those unusual circumstances, right? Those non-linear pathways. We're going to tackle those and hopefully be able to provide y'all with some more context.
Okay, awesome. And we're going to switch over to some questions for Leah about the TASFA. Will my school be added to this? My school is usually not available on Apply Texas. The school is Yes Prep Northbrook High School.
So the listing of high schools is pulled from TEA. So depending on if that institution, we have heard the FAFSA one is horribly unreliable. I think there's a huge lag. So I think our list is better. I don't know that it's completely accurate, but it should be a better one. We're going to continue to improve that. If you find that it's not on there, the student can manually enter it, and then we'll continue to make it better each year.
And then our high school has a very common name, and students often give up, even on FAFSA, trying to find it and just type it in. Will there be an option on TASFA to search by a school code so we can help students find us more successfully and more easily confirm their submissions?
The table does include the high school code on there if they know it, so they can type that in to find it more easily. Again, if it's not in the list, they have to manually enter it. And then I'll follow up with the Apply Texas folks to find out if they're doing some kind of match, but I don't know that they are if it's manually entered. So I don't have an answer on that piece. But again, our list should be cleaner and better than the FAFSA list. So fingers crossed.
Okay, awesome. Is there any solution for registering undocumented students without an ITIN for selective service? The paper form is very unreliable.
There is not an alternative. If the student does not have a social, they still have to register by mail. The only other thing is if the student is exempt, you would just need to work with the college to confirm if they're truly exempt, then they wouldn't have to register. So there's certain reasons why a student is not required to register. You just need to confirm that to make sure that you don't inadvertently have them not register when they need to. So, but no, there's no workaround right now.
So if parents are living separated, but students switches between homes, do they choose only one parent to send the link to?
It's going to be based on the parent that they entered the data for. So if the instructions on the TASFA are very clear on which parent's information to enter onto the TASFA, and it would need to be that parent's email.
Okay. Then is it possible for a student to upload one notarized affidavit to their online TASFA application that universities can access to, so the student doesn't have to send a separate one per college, at least to consider for the future?
Yes, we will. We're hopeful in the future we'll have some kind of upload process, but right now there's no document submission or upload availability. The student does have to submit that to the college directly.
Will all colleges that previously offered an institutional e-TASFA be switching over to this form, or still offer their own online TASFA?
Yes, the state's TASFA is the current and only sole application for state financial aid. So any school that has a separate application, it's possible they may continue to have that in some capacity, but it will not be the TASFA. The only TASFA is the one that I showed you.
And if a parent or student does not consent for the IRS retrieval information and therefore not complete in their forms, how is this going to affect high schools with needing FAFSA or TASFA to be completed for graduation? I guess we would need to do a waiver for these students. is the question.
Yeah, I mean, if you have students, parents who are not providing consent, they can submit their FAFSA, but it will not be complete. So I don't think that, like, in terms of like the graduation requirement, I don't think that that will process over as like this student has completed their FAFSA, because it will be incomplete and they won't be eligible for any federal financial aid.
Okay. In the chat, someone asked if the student can upload additional documents, like the tax return transcript through the electronic TASFA. Will this feature be available?
And that one I already answered, that no, there's no
Yes.
upload. They do it directly to the school.
Thank you. Have the Texas OnCourse resources been updated to reflect the changes with FAFSA and TASFA? This is an ongoing process, and not yet is the easiest answer, unless you have more, Ashley.
Nope, that's correct. Not yet.
As advisors, counselors who work with students, is there any way for us to provide input suggestions for future years of electronic TASFA?
I am so glad you asked that. We're working on a survey / feedback link. It will be available on the TASFA page. I'll put that in the chat so people have it, and then they'll send it out, but it's not out yet. But once you do, you'll be able to provide recommendations, feedback, anything that's broken, anything like that. So it's coming soon.
And then this one's about a contributor. Can students change who the contributor is if needed?
Ideally, yes, right? You can still make corrections to FAFSA after a FAFSA has been submitted. However, your contributor is who you're required to provide parent information, right? Like if you go realize like, oh, we put down the wrong parent, we need to go back and change that. Yes, you can do that, but hopefully the parent wizard questions that students will see are going to help them navigate that, and they'll be able to initially put the right parent. But yes, you can still make corrections on a student's FAFSA.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm gonna do one more question. We're gonna wrap it up. Some of these have already been answered. I know one person, Zena asked, can we also get a copy of the questions asked and the answers? All of this has been recorded, so you'll be receiving the recording as well as the slide deck. So all of these, you'll have access to everything after this presentation. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up with Q&A. Thank you so much, you Aspire and Leah, for answering those questions. And we just briefly, if you don't mind, just taking a moment to answer this 5-question survey for us, if you can just scan that QR code. And really the last question is what we really would like to know is what financial aid topics would you like to dive deeper into during our September coffee chat, which we really hope you're able to join us on September 26th at 10 a.m. Again, that's just a 30-minute, very informal, fun, engaging way to meet with your colleagues and kind of just go over best practices, what's working well on your campus or in your district. So if you don't mind just taking a few minutes to fill out that survey. And thank you all so much for being with us today. Thank you for our guest speakers, as well as Lauren behind the scenes with the links. And again, we're going to send out all of these resources. So all the links that she dropped in the chat will be sending to you. The recording will be sending to you as well as our slide deck. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thank you so much.
Have a good school year.
Thank you.
Thank you all.